welcome back to the third Wednesday of the month, another episode of Everything is Public Health. I'm one of your co-hosts, Big Murray. We have the esteemed Dr. Linda Ray Murray, and today we're going to be talking about Black cancer and research with the great two powerful brothers, Dr. Robert Winn and Dr. Karriem Watson. Dr. Winn, we're gonna go age before you. Go ahead and introduce yourself,
brother. Rob Winn, loving Chicago all the time, but right now in Richmond, Virginia, as the Cancer Center Director for the NCI Designated Cancer Center, VCU, Massey. And just appreciate you all having me on the show.
Thank you. Dr. Watson.
Happy to be here. Always a pleasure to be in the company of Dr. Winn and Dr. Linda Ray Murray, and of course you, Marcus, but I'm always in your company, so it's always great. I'm Karriem Watson, Associate Executive Director of the Miles Square Health Center and Associate Director of Community Outreach and Engagement for the UI Cancer Center. Just happy to be here.
I'm definitely glad you two brothers are on here. Did you check out the game last night? Did anybody have Milwaukee?
Look, it took them 50 years, so I've been instilled my faith that we can actually make some things change if they can win a championship. We can do something over here. So
it's a great game, but I feel for brother CP3.
Yeah, I feel for him. I'm gonna be honest. I was a little disappointed, man. Like Milwaukee, I have nothing against them. But, that's 80 miles from Chicago. How did they get a ring before us? We haven't got a ring since Mike left, man. It's time for us to get back.
They haven't gotten the ring in 50 years.
Man, I have no sympathy or empathy. I'm Chicago strong. And we'll definitely get a ring before New York. But we'll, let's not talk about that. We'll talk about that offline, rather. So, Doc Murray, what's going on? How you feeling today?
I feel great considering everything. I'm glad that people are joining us today, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion, and hopefully some of you listening in will be motivated to do something at the end of this discussion.
We'll start off the discussion. And Dr. Winn, jump in whenever you want. So, Dr. Murray, start us off with something. Tell us the basics of what cancer is.
Well, I think, and especially for our community, I think people's ideas and notions about cancer is steeped in a lot of myth and unfortunately a lot of fatalism. Cancer is really a collection of different diseases. They have many different causes. They take place in different locations in the body. But the thing that ties them together is basically the portions of the cell that control growth and development goes haywire. And so you have abnormal growth, and that's what people think of when they think of cancer. Hopefully that's right. Let me defer. I'm a general internist. Let me defer to my brother here and make sure I'm saying it right.
You spot up on. It is definitely cells that go abnormal that then infect and transform other cells that then form a collection of cells that cause tumors. And so I always think of cancer as an interesting one. Cancer as a cellular problem, and then that cellular abnormality causes a societal issue when you can't go to work or when you're too, right? So it's this real interesting connection between what's going on in your body and then the impacts it has on your life. So Dr. Murray, spot on.
Good. I'm glad I didn't forget that basic stuff.
I was going to ask both you and Karriem in the context, though, of as we're thinking about cancer, there's two things that seems to be both true, but sometimes I don't think it's related, but that's why I like to ask. It's certainly true that I think that we know that the life expectancy overall dropped by 1.5 years, as a result of COVID. But the interesting thing is I'm assuming that also dropped even more for African Americans during the COVID period. But the crazy part about that is cancer didn't stop.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out, what your thoughts are on that, because the truth of the matter is cancer didn't take a break just because we had COVID. Absolutely. And the impact on the African American community.
Right. I think this is such an important time, and people can sort of get a feeling for how we think about public health. before we talk about the change in life expectancy, which is really important, which is why if you skip the cancer screening, you need to get it done. But before we talk about that, let me just say that one of the interesting things for us as physicians and other health professionals is how people get cancer, how many people get cancer, and obviously how many people end up that we aren't good at curing, how many people end up dying, but especially how many people get. It varies. It changes over time, over historical time. It's like our bodies keep track of the mess that's going on. So, for example, back in the day when the steel mills were working, African Americans, Black people, men that worked in the steel mills got lung cancer at extraordinarily high rates because they were disproportionately working in the ovens where there are lots of lung carcinogens. Or sometimes, again, when I was a little girl growing up in Cleveland, Akron Canton made more tires than anywhere else in the world. And again, there's certain cancer-causing chemicals in those tires that are no longer made there, of course, that cause certain kinds of cancer. So we know that there are environmental things that cause cancers and changes that happen at the genetic and molecular level that cause cancer. And so, or here's another great example. In the 50s and 60s, white and Black women got breast cancer at more or less the same rate and died at more or less the same rate because we didn't have good tests to discover the breast cancer, and we didn't have good treatment. Now, today, we still get breast cancer. That's what we call prevalence. We still get breast cancer at the same rate, but Black women are dying at higher rates. Why? In this instance, one of the major reasons why is that the curative medicines and cancer surgery that we have that have really improved people's ability to survive breast cancer don't come to Black women or poor women in the same rate that they come to white women with good insurance. So we have all of these different factors. So I really think of cancer as a mirror. And then to go back to what Dr. Winn was talking about, the life expectancy for, I think, Black men went down by over 3 years. And Hispanic men is also over 3 years. I think Latinx men had the highest rate of decrease. So life expectancy is like, it's like taking a temperature. It's like when your mama put the hand up on your forehead and say, yo, you're sick. So when we look at life expectancy, it's a crude measure. It doesn't tell us all the details. So we see life expectancy going down during wars, during the big influenza pandemic of 1918. And of course, that it goes down during COVID. It's not a surprise. And so we have to worry about that because people didn't go to their doctors. They skipped their cancer screenings. They skipped their high blood pressure checks. They might have run out of medicine. So in addition to COVID killing people, and we know that COVID killed Blacks and Latinos and Native Americans at higher rates, we also know that those other diseases, heart disease, cancer, all these other drug overdoses, all these other causes of mortality went up during the pandemic. The pandemic is not over, so it's still going up.
So
I'm so happy that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Marcus.
I want to touch on two things you said and throw this question out. First, I understand what you meant by skip, but I want to make it clear, a lot of us didn't have access as well, so it's not like people just skipped appointments, because of the lockdown of COVID. I just want to make sure you're not throwing that out there.
Absolutely. Many health facilities stopped doing the screening. People didn't have money. They lost their insurance. Right. It was dangerous to go out. No, there are lots of reasons why. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that.
But I want to touch on something you and Dr. Winn said and throw it back out to you, and then let Karriem, Dr. Watson jump in. You all started off talking about cancer as like something to deal with cells, with cell manipulation or something. So let me ask, and then you all started talking about other variables, other determinants like environmental. Is stress a factor in making the cancer cells more aggressive and spreading throughout your body? Just as we talk about the scientific part.
Watson, you want to take that?
You got it too. I'll kick it off, and Dr. Winn, we're gonna go back to some work that you was doing in your lab back in the day that you're still doing, or you might call it the studio. Some people call it the lab, some people call it the studio because it's where we make things happen. But one of the things that Dr. Winn was talking to us about back in the day when he was at UIC, and still now we've even got a grant to look at it, is this concept of epigenetics. So it's the gene that you're born with, but then it's the things that happen to that gene even after you're born, right? So it's cool that we found out, fortunately, that only about less than 10% of cancers are associated with gene mutations that you're born with, meaning that a mother or father passed down something to their child and you have a family history of cancer. That's only about 10%. The rest of what we're seeing is really about what's happening to us. And one of the things that we really see this happening is this concept of stress. Whether you call it systemic racism, which I'm always not a fan of the word systemic in front of racism, because it just makes it more palatable for people. If I say it's the system as opposed to something else, that means that people feel a little better about it. But it's racism. It's being without a job. It's being without food. It's having the stress. And then you put on top of that the pandemic. All that stuff can cause epigenetic changes. So we got a project right now, Marcus, that we're looking at. Lung cancer kills more Black men than prostate cancer. We hear a whole lot about prostate cancer, a whole lot about colorectal cancer, but lung cancer kills more Black men than prostate and colorectal cancer combined. But we don't hear a whole lot of talk about it. So one of the questions that we're asking with some help from Dr. Winn's lab, even though they're in Virginia, we're still working together, is it something happening with that things that we're exposed to, the foods that we eat, the stress that we're under? Does being a Black man in America predispose you to an elevated amount of stress? So we're going to be looking at things like cortisol levels, Marcus, and asking, does that cortisol level, is it higher in certain Black men based on your zip code? So in other words, what we always say is sometimes your zip code is more determinant of your health than your genetic code.
I'll jump in real quick and just break it down like they used to do back in the day and break down the word epi. All it means, right? Root word from Latin, all the rest of that other stuff. Y'all can look it up. But epi, by definition, means upon or above. So when we talk about epigenetics, that's impact upon your genetics, right? Or on top of what you have. So as we're talking about these factors, as Dr. Watson just talked about, you're being stressed out. I always tell people the following. Because they always want to actually point to the South Side and all the rest of that. But you know what? We have some incredibly stressed out, true fact that African-American doctors, men doctors anyways, tend to live less than their white counterparts as physicians. Now, one could say, so let's, we definitely want to talk about the Southwest side, Chicago, East End, Richmond, all the rest of that. But don't get twisted that the epigenetic issues were also there and related to why, in no uncertain terms, Beyonce and Serena Williams, which have all the money in the world, still had difficult pregnancy. So this shows up in cancer as well. So just because you got a little bit of money now, don't mean that all of a sudden, since you left the hood or your family's left the hood, that all of a sudden you are off of the hook, which is why we have to be extra vigilant around, in my mind, preventing cancer when we can. It's not always easy, particularly in some of our neighborhoods, but preventing it and doing, things that we can to prevent it. But by definition, also getting out there and screening, because, I may be, the people's like doctor, cancer center director, but if you give the data, my life is probably going to be at least X number of years shorter than the same person who's a cancer center director right now at University of at Northwestern or whatever, simply by my being Black and my lived experience. So that's something to remember.
So I like the question. I like to use the word structural racism. I like to do it because I want to make clear what's going on here, and I want us to be careful. Now, I'm so old that when I was in medical school, epigenetics didn't exist. Okay, so we were taught.
Dr. Murray.
What?
Come on, Dr. Murray.
I'm old. I'm 72. When I was in medical school, the concept of epigenetics would have got me an F on all of my, they may not have let me graduate. What do I mean by that? In my generation, going to medical school in the 70s, The notion was your genetic material was there and more or less was unchanged and unchangeable. So one of the things that as our concept and understanding of how the human body works, and in this case genetics, increased, it became clear that environmental issues, whether it's a carcinogen from tobacco smoke or stress from being Black and having these racist people drive you crazy, it can actually alter the genetic material in your body, which, as we said before, is what controls how things are working in your body. So that's an important advance, but we have to be very careful. I want to recommend to people a great book by Joseph Graves Jr. He's an evolutionary biologist, a good brother, called The Emperor's New Clothes, which looks at the theories of biology. Let me put it to you this way. In the 1600s, I'm going to be talking about Western science now, so excuse me. When the white folks in Europe start trying to become scientists, they look at the world and they see differences. They see different kind of plants, different kind of animals, and physically different looking human beings. That's where they invent this ideological theory of racism, what we now call scientific racism. So what they said is, oh, this skin is darker than this skin, so one of them must be inferior. And that's where we get this whole notion by skull size, skin color, hair, about race and racism, because they felt, and I think this is a critical thing, that there's a hierarchy in terms of human beings. So I think it's important as we get these new tools of genetic typing and the genome studies that we not fall into the same trap of thinking that this means that race is a biological category and that it means that human beings are on a hierarchy. So that's something we have to avoid, because when we've done studies very recently in the past 3, 4, 5 years, and you ask medical students and residents what they think about race and things like, is the skin of Black people thicker than the skin of white people? A disturbing percentage of medical students and residents will answer yes, which is the incorrect answer. So, so there's no question that your life experiences are imprinted on your body. I don't care what color you are. But all of those things together, it's not just stress. It's one thing to be stressful as Bezos going up in his rocket ship. It's another thing to be stressful as a brother on the corner. I mean, so you got a lot of other things going in. And let me put it to you in a really clear way. To me, the answer to stress causing cancer is not for all of us to know how to do meditation. The answer to stress causing cancer is for us to end racism. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Come on.
Well, shit, I'm screwed then if I gotta wait on racism. So let me recap this for a second. So Dr. Watson said there's a less than 10% chance, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to break it down for our viewers. There's a less than 10% chance that I will contract cancer through inherited through my father, grandmother, my mother. It's more about the social determinants or the factors that I'm dealing with today. And as a Black man dealing with racism, dealing with everything else, what's my options? My option is just to get screened. Is there something I can do to, counteract this stuff? I mean, what's the importance of screening then? Why should I get screened? Because like Dr. Murray said, we're not getting rid of racism. So what's the purpose of getting screened for something I'm probably going to get as a Black man?
I think if I may jump in, and Dr. Winn, this is kind of what the reason when you were here, we're one of the only federally qualified health centers, community health centers in the city that actually has a mammogram machine on site. Meaning that as a community health center, we can see you despite your ability to pay. The importance of that, getting that screen, is that early detection. You're absolutely right. We ultimately need to end racism, because I hate the word resilience too, because don't ask me to be resilient. Stop doing stuff to me that I have to bounce back from. Stop putting the pressure on me. I don't want to have to be resilient. But in terms of the importance of screening, I'll take colorectal cancer, for example. Colorectal cancer is one of the few cancers where screening can be prevention. What do I mean by that? We all heard when Will Smith got his colonoscopy, right? And he was so surprised. He came back and said, the doctor found a polyp. And they told me that that polyp that they found, had I let it go on for at least another 5 or 10 years, it could have developed into another cancer. So that's Will Smith telling you about his experience, right? We had another young brother when we was doing a colorectal cancer screening this past summer in the midst of COVID-19, tell us the same thing. He even went to his doctor and said, hey, what I learned from you all was that the screening age has been lowered from 50 to 45. So he went and told his doctor, because doctor was like, no, you good for another 5 years. He was like, no, I'm not. The guidelines have changed. He got the information from us, went and told his primary care doctor, went and got the colonoscopy. They found a polyp that was a precancerous polyp that he had removed. I say all that to say, Marcus, that unlike Will Smith, if this brother had waited 5 years, Will Smith actually probably would have had an okay outcome had he had an early detection of colorectal cancer. He would have had the best treatment at the best location with the best food access. They would have changed his diet and everything else, right? But this brother who lived on the south side of Chicago would have had to navigate some things differently than Will Smith would have had to navigate. And so that's why this concept of screening is so important. And Dr. Winn, I believe you posted it on your LinkedIn page recently, the fact that cancer screenings are down by almost like crazy percentages, particularly for all of Americans, but particularly for Black Americans, those cancer screenings.
The crazy part about that, Brother Watson, is the fact that while the cancer screenings are down, cancer ain't stopping. And we started off by saying the group that is disproportionately impacted negatively by cancer are African Americans. Now, for a multitude of reasons, right? But the data are the data. African American men will die more than from prostate cancer than white men. African American women are still dying from breast cancer, although, we noticed that what I really love what Dr. Murray, started off with, which is in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when they were all at the same because they didn't have any therapy. So this is, again, structure being introducing to some of these disparities as well. It ain't just genetics. In fact, we talk about us being more susceptible to comorbid diseases. Well, I got something for you. It was redlining and the urban renewal projects that destroyed our communities that actually added to those comorbid diseases. So why would somebody get screened? Because there's going to be additional 15 to 25,000 more deaths in each of these categories. And why should it be Black folk? Why should it be anybody? But in particular, why should it be African Americans, particularly when you think of colorectal and cervical and some of the things you can screen for? If you can screen and catch it early, why wouldn't you want to do that?
The other thing I think that's important, we should be careful about what words we use. So what I would say is that we haven't done a study to prove this. We all talked about how we feel stress adversely impacts cancer and a number of other things, blood pressure, but I personally believe, I don't believe in resilience. I believe in resistance and revolt. I think revolt and resistance is therapeutic. So let me just be clear about that. So I think to the extent that we fight back and we fight for our lives and the lives of our children and family members, that has a positive impact on our blood pressure, on everything. If we talked about diseases differently, so we can talk about how many, still cardiovascular diseases is the #1 leading cause of death in the United States and among Black men and women. But what about
that's stress and racism too?
Well,
go ahead.
That's what I'm saying. We should use some other words. Don't just say stress. Racism, poverty, poor education, bad housing. I mean, you can use some different words as ideological causes, and we may not be able to repair all of it at once. But if we are united in a revolt and resistance, that's how we survive these 500 years. So if we're united in a revolt and resistance, I do think that rebounds well to our health. But for where we know how to do stuff like screening for kids. So people 45 after what's the brother, that's the Black Panther brother, after he died.
Chadwick Boseman.
There you go. Every young Black person, especially Black men, need to be getting a colonoscopy starting at age 45, Mr. Murray.
Why you throw me out there? And for the record, I want to tell the fans that when Dr. Murray says revolt, we're talking about just a nice protests don't come after the 3 black men on here. You see my fingers crossed, they don't see it. So let me say this. Let me say this to you 3. Like, I know what you all do, and I know the importance of screening and everything. But one of the things I wanted to add is that if you get screened early enough, it's livable. It's a livable disease. One thing all of us do on here is figure out ways for black people to realize the importance of getting screened, and it's not about them. Let me tell you a quick story. I think I was 19 when I found out my grandfather had cancer, prostate cancer. The first thing he told me, he said, man, I'm not letting them cut my dick open or mess with me down there. I'd rather die. So the testosterone and the machoism, I respected that. Like, you know, he said, I lived a good life. I'm not tripping. But then when we talked about the aspect of living for other people or seeing other people around you, not necessarily, you know, in terms of just being there for them, but being that provider and protector on some testosterone stuff, he lasted another 25 years, Doc. So one of the things that I do want to reinforce is that for everybody, men and women, getting these screenings is not just about you. It's about the people that you have in your life, the people that you leave behind, or the people that need you. One of the things we used to do with our Black Men in Project Brotherhood is talk about the importance of leaving your children behind. Like, you have daughter, who's going to be there to teach your daughter how to drive, to walk her down the aisle, things of that nature. So the importance of screening, even though, you know, I might play like, oh, what's the importance? We all understand it and we all respect it. So that goes into research. So Doc Winn, Doc Murray,
let me just correct
go
some
ahead.
history here, just so people are clear. So Raymond, my father, his grandfather, he did not get surgery, but he opted for a perfectly reasonable alternative that was discussed, which is localized radiation for his prostate cancer. And you're right, he lived another several decades and saw your children. So it does make a difference if we don't just throw up our hands. People have a right to individually choose how much treatment they want to get and when, but there are lots of options and there are new options every day. And so in my father's case, he did elect for the radiation option as opposed to the knife, and it served him well.
Right. Just the more to that story was the importance of him wanting to go through all that for other people, not for himself. Just as Black men, sometimes, you know, we used to getting beat up. That ain't nothing. That, you know, death doesn't scare us. But the ability to leave our loved ones unprotected now, you know, that you hitting my heart, you hitting my core. I'm not leaving my women behind, you know. But in terms of like just why is research important in cancer? Why do Black folks specifically need to get involved in research when it comes to cancer?
To grip up on this one. This is something that's straight up passion. I'm gonna get Reverend Barber and stuff up on his mic and get real close because listen, here's what's true. I mean, you know, and again, I know we live in a society of misinformation, disinformation, and all the rest of this stuff, and not trying to get all of Imhotep and not trying to get all of, you know, that the first in the universities and thinking about analytic and critical thinking actually comes from, you know, Timbuktu and Africans and all the rest of this stuff and getting back to our roots. But we have to be able to understand that you can have your own opinion. And I understand that data could be presented in multiple different ways, but y'all, we're going to have to create some type of green book that we actually do feel some comfort in the context around health. Why does research matter? Turns out that in the since 1990 to 2021, the Black-white death gap has, for cancer anyways, has reduced from roughly about 34% down to 14. And that doesn't mean we ain't got a whole lot of room to go. The reality is there's more people living with cancer than dying from it. Now, people who ain't ever on the floors or see patients will talk some craziness. Yin yang, we used to call it up in the barbershop about, well, you know, some of these people, they giving you all this poison, they ain't doing nothing. Right. There was a time where all we had was some poison. And that was the best they could do. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But I got to tell you now, if you had an advanced stage breast cancer woman, African-American, or an advanced stage lung cancer person, and I got to see you 30, 40 years ago, the treatment outcome is very different than it is today. There are women, and listen, it's getting to a point where you can even go through and I can show people their records and bring the person in front of them, they still wouldn't believe. That's how crazy we've gotten now. We're going to have to get back to some reality. That's another topic for another day about the critical thinking and the ability to think critically, of which we as a people were very much embraced for and set the foundation and the standard for. But that's another conversation for another day. But there are women now 14, 15, 18 years out living with advanced breast cancer because of the very medicines and behaviors and health and accessibility of the cancer. Right. That came why? Not just because there was some sort of Martians who, some drugs fell from the sky, but that came because of research. The most important thing, though, for me is that when you ain't at the table, you on the menu being eaten up? If we really want the questions asked about us, then we need to actually be promoting more of African Americans, men and women, who are in the field being able to control and input in the big data sciences, the artificial intelligence. Look, you can argue all day long about you on one of the machines and the artificial intelligence. Every time you pick up your phone, it's doing something with artificial intelligence. And every time you go on Amazon, they already know you. So stop talking to yin yang, right? It's almost like being blissfully ignorant don't mean that it ain't happening to you, okay? So research, for me, allows us to start asking as a community, getting data, what are the questions that we should prioritize and what are the questions we should study so that we can not just study for another book or study for another paper, but make it academically relevant so that information can be used to improve our health. That's where we need to be going. So am I passionate about research? Definitely.
I think what Dr. Winn is saying is so critical. When I was young, back in the 60s, my attitude was research was crazy. That's something white people did to us. And which was actually true. They do. But the key is what Dr. Winn just said. That's not really what research is. Research is asking the question. Then you can worry about trying to find out an answer to the. So the white person will never asking, well, how can we make Black men's lives better? That's not what they were asking. Okay. So we need researchers of all types, and certainly in this area of cancer research, and not just by the way the cellular stuff, but how people emotionally react to it, the whole range, a multidisciplinary range to cancer, because we need to frame the questions. That's where the real power in research lies. You frame the questions, and then you have a logical way, a systematic way of trying to explore possible answers.
And Dr. Murray, I'll agree with everything you said. And not only do we need to be the ones asking the questions, but we need to be the ones also in positions of power. We can also fund the people asking the questions. Because the reality of it is that before Dr. Winn, young researchers like me, we were discouraged from asking questions about Black men and cancer. We were actually told that if you build your career around asking questions about the outcomes of Black men and cancer, you will not get funded. We were discouraged from doing that work. But when you get a cancer center director who understands the lived experience of the same patients that you're doing the research on, and you're not doing it on them, you're doing it with them, then who's funding the questions can even change. Because before Dr. Winn, many of us weren't funded to ask the questions that we're asking now. But we got into the studio with him and learned how to speak multiple languages and how to write the same question a different way. And we're like, aha, you thought we was asking one question, but we're really asking two. And the question that we're asking is this: even the idea that you threw out there, Dr. Murray, that's a researchable question. Is self, because we would call it like agency and self-efficacy, right? It would really be about you resisting and revolting, but we would put some public health term on it that would make people a little bit more palatable, saying, and we could measure it. Do you have less cortisol levels? Is your blood pressure lower? Do you have less stress hormones when you actually stand up and stand up for yourself? The answer probably is yes. But now that question is out there, and we get cancer directors like Dr. Winn, they won't be looking at you side-eye when I write that abstract and present it to them and say, I need a little bit of pilot fund to get some preliminary data so I can ask bigger questions about this.
Look at that. It's funny. That'd be like telling little Richard to sound like Pat Boone back in the day, right? Like, you can't be talking about some wop, ba, balloon, ba, right? And ultimately, because he was able to do his thing, he was able then to actually put forward a music. I think this is our time, particularly as African Americans at this point in this of history, to be able to take more control of the ability to ask those questions that are going to impact our community. And in fact, the research thing, people talk about research. I'm like telling you do research every day. In fact, some people do research on some crazy thing. You do like 3-hour research on figuring out whether you should get Coca-Cola, which is on sale and all the rest of this other stuff, as opposed to doing some additional research on, well, what things matter to the community. Where's doctors? What should I know? What's the difference between a designated cancer center, and what should they be doing? Actually, half the time when we're accessing even healthcare, we don't really know. We just figure out you just show up at some doctor's office or some hospital and they're supposed to just take care of you. Well, the reality is everything plays a different role. And so I think asking those questions and integrating the research questions into how it's going to impact the community it ain't nothing new. Dr. Murray, every time I actually would come up with something, I know she'd be like, yeah, but we already had thought of that. The problem has been that I think that many of the programs that were working were dismantled somewhere around the lines in the 80s with the Reagan administration and other things. And then ultimately they've now become forgotten. And so we wind up recreating these things over and over and over again, as opposed to building on the foundation we have. And the foundation of research is the foundation and the essence of human beings, man. Listen, when I think of the DNA, that DNA, those little building blocks, right, of those little bases, man, that's how God spoke us into being, right? People think about the disconnect between science and all the rest of the stuff. That's how we were created into being. And having a better understanding of that and a better understanding of how it impacts us, I think helps us come up with not only new therapies, man, but it comes up with better ways of us understanding us.
And I think to the extent that we connect these fields is so important. I want to now, Dr. Winn is older than you two gentlemen, but he's not that old. I kept trying to remember the brothers. Dr. The leading oncologist of my youth was Dr. Friedman. Was that him?
And Howard. My God, yeah.
At Howard, right? So, and so and we've had all of this kerfuffle with the UNC. So let me just say, Black scientists have always worked in the white academy, but they've also worked in HBCUs, and that communication back and forth, because the HBCUs ask the right questions. Okay, they learn how to play the game. So it's not just learning how to play the game with grant writing. It means you have to be in communication with our colleagues that are asking the questions. We have to look at other groups, other people of color in terms of asking those questions. And we have to understand that when George Floyd gets murdered and it's televised and there are demonstrations all around the world, then it becomes possible for our School of Public Health at UIC, for medical schools all over the country, for the young people to say, yo, we need to be studying how to be anti-racist. That didn't happen because they were intellectually curious. That happened because there's a movement in the streets. So research that we do in the lab or research that we do on populations has to be connected with people's real lives. It's connected with social movements. And in public health, we know that when we're connected with social movements, that's when we make real progress.
What black folks don't be. We got to stop this. What black folks don't do. Black folks don't ride horses. Black folks don't ride bikes. Black folks don't. Come on, y'all. I mean, the truth of the matter is, we had, even before that sort of movement in the 50s and 60s would destroy most of our neighborhoods, we had neighborhoods that were at the top. Yeah, Harlem you look at Tulsa, right? They call that, or down here in Richmond, like the Black Harlem and all the rest of these things, the Wall Street, the Black Wall Street. That was in many places, even though there was segregation, we were really talking about, you think about W.E.B. Du Bois. He's one of the best social scientists around, right? We weren't afraid of academics and science and understanding this. So why are we so afraid now, right? That's just that Jedi mind trick of like having us recognize that, well, we don't belong. We belong everywhere. You know what? We belong where we at. Wherever you at, that's where you belong. So we got to stop all this stuff about we shouldn't be, and the only other places to be is like on a ball court. But I wish I knew how to break some ankles like that. I ain't got, my crossover ain't like that. But but there are other things in sports and music and all that. But there's so many other opportunities. And I think that one of the things that we're hopefully coming out of is that the interest in health is going to extend into our community so that we drive more people into policy and going to lab and doing all these other things, because we believe that those things are going to have a positive benefit on our communities. Or at least I'm hopeful.
I agree with two things. First, I agree cats from New York do not have a good crossover. The crossover was invented by Tim Hardaway.
Oh, my God.
Derrick Rose. Mark Jackson never had a crossover. Kenny Smith, his knees he ain't got no crossover. But let me get on my soapbox real quick and break down to the white folks and the funders and some of you black folks, because I'm gonna be honest, I can say things that other people can't say. Dr. Winn and Dr. Watson are black. Everybody knows Dr. Murray is black. Some of you black folks are prejudiced against other black folks, and that's just as bad as racism. But black people can't be racist because we don't have the power. First of all, research is not a bad word, man. This clinical, I'm gonna break it down in my way. There's clinical research that's dealing with the body and blood and all that, and then there's social research. To me, we need to start the research game all over. So when these doctors are talking about people of color, I'm gonna break it down. We need black folks to do research on black folks. We need to take the FUBU approach. Let me give you an example, white folks and black funders, all you funders. Right now, if you ask researchers to ask, not these researchers, but most researchers to talk to black men, if they ask a question like, have you ever been incarcerated? What does that mean to black men? Does that mean prison? Does that mean county? So there's different ways. Have you been arrested and just released? So there's different ways and there's different ways to ask that question, and you'll get different answers. So when you talk about research and you talk about cancer, and you're coming to people talking about what they need as opposed to trying to dictate to them, then they'll give answers talking about, well, my heat isn't on, I don't have a job. They're going to start talking about the social determinants that affect their health. Now, these doctors just said how stress and these social things mess with the cells in your body and mutates. The only way to help our people is us helping them. And here's the key, though, white folks and administrators and universities. If you let these black researchers get in and help you, you'll get that indirect grant money, because it's about the money. It's a business. You'll get that indirect money, and we'll be able to help people at the same time. It's that simple. So one of my suggestions is maybe like for people on your level, we start calling in some of these CFOs into the room to talk about the importance of research and how we can make more money for the university, get more press, because that's all they want. They just want to take their cameras in the hood and say, look, we had a day over at this church and we did this and this many screenings. So it's on me, not these people, and me and Dr. Murray, because those two are still employed. It's on us to make sure the hood gets there and to say the things that they can't say. But for real, research is not a bad word, and it's needed. And black researchers, black academics, stop being so damn scary, man. Stand up. You went to school and got these doctoral degrees for a reason. Stop letting these white folks dictate how we engage with us. If we really want to help the hood, talk to the hood. We're all from the hood. Stop separating yourself. Let me stop, man. Let me stop before I get y'all in trouble.
And you was on fire, man. You was on a roll. Love that. You was on a roll.
I think the real issue is if what you're trying to do is a careerist kind of approach, and now let me be clear. One of my favorite quotes from Brother Malcolm is, thinking is dangerous. So let me not pretend that if you are a thinking human being, especially if you are black and think, you're not considered dangerous. I don't want to deny that. But it's bad science. It's not just a question of being brave. It's a question of you cannot address diabetes in this country if you can't talk to black people and Native American people and Mexican American people who have more, you can't do it. So you can't do good science just from a white lens, a European lens, a middle class, upper middle class lens. You can't do it. You have to involve all of these communities, and you can't do it because human beings aren't animals. So you have to do research. You have to ask the questions and answer the questions in a collective fashion with communities.
I love that.
And Marcus, you talked about the research, and Dr. Winn, you've given us this, we've talked about this example before. It's so important about just understanding that we can't just be at the table, but we actually have to be determining what's on the grocery list, not just what's on the menu, but what we gonna cook. Because when you think about the concept of cervical cancer is one of those cancers that there's HPV vaccine out there that we know that if you get the back, because cervical cancer is an issue that many people get exposed to HPV, but it's an issue of your ability to clear HPV, right? To be able to get rid of it. So when this whole vaccine research first started, and I'll be quick, the vaccine covered 2 strains of HPV. And HPV, like many viruses, like you hear us talking about the SARS-CoV-2 virus, because when we talk about viruses, you all, they often are in this concept of strains, and we give them different names, but it's usually a family, a class, and they have strains. So when we realized that HPV was associated with cervical cancer, we began to look at what strains of the virus are associated with cervical cancer. But this research, you all, that developed the first HPV vaccine had very few Black women and brown women in those studies. As a result, the first vaccines that were developed early on covered 2 strains of HPV that weren't the strains, believe it or not, that were most commonly found in Black and brown women that got cervical cancer. It took a Black researcher to begin to call that data out. It was a Black woman who said, wait a second, something is off about this, because what I'm seeing in my patients is different types of strains than what we're seeing. And so as a result of that, we're now asking that question differently. We're not even just asking that question in the US, but we're going abroad. We're going to West Africa and East Africa and saying, what are the strains that are most common in people of African descent that may be more difficult to clear, that may be leading to cervical cancer? That's what happens when you empower Black people to do the research and include research and to be a part of the solution.
So the other thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is that there's this interesting trend that just because you don't believe it, it don't happen. And what I mean by that is, I don't believe there's COVID. Well, the crazy part about that is if it takes you to be on a ventilator to then say, well, oh my God, there's COVID. Just like people say, I've had somebody say something crazy to me the other day. Now, they don't believe in cancer. Cancer don't really happen. Unlike cancer is documented. That's one of the things I know we have documented throughout history. And the truth of the matter is, it is also one of these things in which the body itself just makes some sense, right? As you age and as you get older, right? Your cells don't live forever, neither do you, right? So there's mechanisms of being able to sort of do that. So it is not something that is, even if you did everything right, they call cancer, what is it? The cancer is the disease of aging. Now, we understand that as you then accumulate stresses, exposures, you're probably accelerating that. But the truth of the matter is that I want people to understand that health does not mean the absence of disease. Health does not mean the absence of pain. And the truth of the matter is, your belief is great, but cancer is here. And there are some things that we're going to have to do as a community to grip back on, figuring out how we take care of one another, how we get each other's out to screenings, how we be better about what's on our diet and prevention and all of that. I'm not even talking about medicine. I'm talking about the things that we can do to try to prevent cancer from happening in the first place is within our ability. And we need to be more focused on that.
So Doc Winn, for the cats that live in inner cities that have to deal with these, environmental issues and these other issues, and even if they eat healthy, because you said MDs, Black MDs die younger than their white counterparts. So how do we address these issues with Black folks when Black folks now have the power of the internet in their hand and they're reading about brothers like Dr. Seba? They read, eating to change their diet and eliminating the cancer. And then now there's a white guy, I think his name is Joe Tippett, who came out with like a cocktail with deworming medicine that they use for dogs, CBD medicine, vitamin E, and something else, and he's claimed to cure himself of cancer. Why should black folks, and I know it deals with trust, but why should we trust the system as opposed to just picking up these natural remedies that we're finding on the internet?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. The one thing is that, at least I'm telling you the truth, I ain't gonna be able to cure everything. Anytime someone gets up in there and talk about, I got the magical drug that's going to cure everything and cure your cancer and keep you from getting it and keep you from doing it. If that secret were passed on, I would have loved to have that. That's like what's that, Ponce de On and the Fountain of Youth? I wish I could find that fountain. The truth of the matter is these things are going to happen. So I just say, be careful. And if anybody's talking, you know what? I had a mentor once who said, the grass is not usually greener, it's just green. But when it is, it's been fertilized with more BS. Just letting you know. So in general, when you start hearing some things that just sound like, right, just all I'm saying is use your critical mind of thinking and just do a little bit more investigating, because I've had 2 friends in my lifetime that went from treatable cancers to not treatable cancers because they were using some shark fin cartilage and using some scorpion things. The truth of the matter is, I'm not going to ever say that Western medicine is superior to any other medicine, because that too would be a lie. But what I am going to be truthful is that ultimately all we're doing is trying to, it is the practice of medicine, not the perfection of. We practice medicine, right? And so whether it's Eastern medicine or whether it's Western medicine, there is the practice of medicine that we are trying to actually treat disease. But the truth of the matter is there ain't no 100% of anything. And I just wish people would be more honest about that, and that, and not get up to me and sort of say, well, if I just take this shark fin, I'm going to be fine. You know what? It don't really matter whether you're rich or poor either. And Steve Jobs. Well, you can't ask him now, but how many months was wasted? Because again, so what I'm saying to you is that even when you go to Western and they talk about, we got the perfect cure, come on, y'all. No, we got some medicine that we will try. And in general, we hope that it works. But there's always the 1% or whatever chance, I think Dr. Berry knows, that you have an uncommon presentation of something that's common or people won't respond. And so we need to be more honest that what we're doing is trying to help you, be healthy. But I ain't trying to lie to anybody that we got the perfect cure. And in fact, ain't nobody else got the perfect cure that I seen. So, but people will take your money. They talk about money, in the medical business. Check out some of them cats and how much money they bankrolling too. Now, y'all probably don't know nothing about no Reverend Ike. But I'm just gonna go back to you, Reverend Ike.
Reverend Ike's before that time.
So somebody just texted me. Let me throw this question out to you guys because we're running out of time. Somebody said, "How do you guys feel?" Wait, let me make sure I got it. How do you guys feel about there being a COVID vaccine but no cure? A COVID vaccine within months but no cure for cancer. Is it a conspiracy?
No, not at all. So let's be clear. First of all, there wasn't a COVID vaccine within months. We spent 30, 40 years developing those mRNA vaccines. Okay, so the underlying technology took decades to develop. So these are the first vaccines widespread using this technology. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as we said at the beginning, cancer is not one disease. Cancer is a whole family of diseases with a whole even larger number of etiological causes for this machinery to go haywire. So you're comparing apples and oranges. If people just take an area let's look, we started off talking about last night's game. Now, I don't know where people were down on, who should win, but we all know you can evaluate the players of football, baseball, basketball, and once the game starts, you can't really predict with certainty who's going to win. Okay, that's the reality of life, and the same thing in these areas. So we don't have to depend on conspiracy theories with a lot of this stuff. And hopefully we're going to do an update on what's going on with COVID. But the COVID vaccine was not developed in a few months, despite what Donald Trump says. The COVID vaccine took decades to develop. If you understand how that's like saying LeBron James developed in 6 months. LeBron James started playing ball when he was 6 or 7. It took him years to develop his skills. So all we have to use is our common sense. To me, just be thoughtful and ask yourself how they're framing the issue. Does that even make sense? And I think you'll find that oftentimes it doesn't.
And Dr. Murray, the other spin as a cancer researcher, I was encouraged, believe it or not, when people would say, oh, do you think that's some conspiracy theory about? No, what that showed me as a researcher is that when you put the appropriate amount of funding behind asking a question and you put the dollars in the hands of the right people, the scientists, the smart folks, and let them self-actualize and do what it is that they were trained to do, ask the right questions with the right people at the table, we can do so much more. So what I think we should be saying is we should be encouraging our elected officials and others to say, we did it for COVID, and I'm happy that we did it because that allowed us to get to a place where we're seeing our country to get back to a semblance of opening back up. So if we can do that for this, we need to be raising more monies for cancer centers. When you see Dr. Winn posting on LinkedIn saying that they're hosting a run, a walk, or a swim, don't just think that they just out there trying to get in the water to go swimming. They're actually trying to raise money to be able to do exactly what we did with COVID-19 research, to fund the types of research that can really begin to ask the questions. So I'm encouraged, Marcus, because it shows me that with the appropriate amount of funding, with the right resources, we can do some things that we've only dreamed of and imagined.
I agree with you, Karriem, but let me be clear about this. If we do this great research and develop these great vaccines and act stupid, like white folks tend to do that have money, and you don't vaccinate the world, that's why Delta's here now. So when you create a vaccine and think you're only going to give it to a few people in rich countries and you ignore the rest of the world, I can guarantee you it's not just Delta. We're going to have a bunch of variants because that's how they're made among populations that are getting sick and passing the virus around. So if you take this knowledge and skills and tools and misuse them, or try to keep them to yourself, to your little inner group, that's bad science and you will fail.
I'm not getting another shot. The hell with that. If we're going to have more variants, I'm going to eat some more fruits and vegetables. But as we run out of time, I'm serious, man. I don't feel right after that shot. As we run out of time, I want to pass it around to my colleagues. First, I'm glad y'all were on here, but I want to pass it around. We usually let you all in with something you want to say. It could be about cancer. It could be about your life or anything. So since we started with the elders, we'll start with the young boy. Dr. Watson, you got anything you want to close with?
Yeah, I do. I just want to encourage any young people listening, because I know the public health professionals are listening. Y'all support a lot of young people. Find yourself a good mentor, a good sponsor, somebody that believes in you. Ask some questions, lock arms with them, and learn from them so that you can learn how to be part of the solution and not the problem. So get connected.
Doc Winn?
I think that all I got to say is that I really love being in your presence again. I mean, I miss y'all. I know y'all ain't never that far. You're always on my mind, but I'm really glad that I got an opportunity to spend at least a little time with you all again, and look forward to doing that hopefully in the future.
Doc Murray?
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I especially want to thank our guests. And as we talked about today, cancer hasn't gone anywhere. And we are in danger of losing more of our people to cancer. And COVID is not over. And so we have to be alert on this. We have to do what our ancestors have done. We have to make sure that we juggle 2, 3, 10, 20 balls at the same time if we're going to survive.
And I just want to say, too, thanks again for Dr. Winn and Dr. Watson coming on. You know, we work together. We still work together, Dr. Watson. These brothers do some incredible things for Black folks. And Black folks, we have to learn the difference between facts and opinion. Whether cancer is man-made, whether they have a cure and they're holding it from us, it doesn't matter. The fact is, it's killing our people. If we get screened, we can live longer. And we need to start supporting these brothers and talking to our elected officials and these foundations and making sure that they get the dollars they need to ask the right questions that'll benefit us. So again, thanks to you, brothers. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you the third Wednesday of next month. And just be safe. And of course, always thanks to my main man, the super producer, Dr. Dre. Thanks, Dre.